Before I get started with today's video, I want to tell people ahead of time that you're going to be seeing some abstract sort of representations of people, good guys and bad guys. Now, some people are going to get on me saying that's sexist, saying good guys and bad guys and using male figures. Well, I'm using the term guys as a unisex term. And as for the figures, well, I don't see any penises or vaginas on them. So if you want to assume their sex, you go right ahead. You go ahead and make that decision before asking them how they identify. That's on you, not on me. And with that being said, let's get started. Today I want to take some time to talk about the facts and fallacies of firearms, as in how they pertain to the eternal struggle between good guys and bad guys. As we all know, there's a lot of people on this planet. Some of them are good guys, and some of them are bad guys. Now, I think the one saving grace of the human race as a species is that there are far more good guys than truly bad guys. That's what keeps the bad guys in check somewhat. But that really only works if there's a lot of good guys around, which is why bad guys, who always need a victim to actually be bad guys, they like to take on good guys one at a time, when it's just you and them. Another thing the bad guys like to do is, because they don't like a fair fight, they like to have something that gives them an advantage. They don't want their victims to be on equal footing with them. They want to have some sort of physical advantage before they choose a victim. And one fact about firearms is they definitely give you an advantage, which is why a lot of bad guys, if they can get a hold of one, choose to use a firearm to give themselves an advantage. Now, a fallacy of firearms is that some people out there that dislike guns would love to tell you that if this bad guy didn't have a handgun or a rifle or any type of firearm, that he wouldn't be able to have an advantage, and therefore good guys would be safe from bad guys. And all we have to do to know that's a fallacy is just look at the world around us. Bad guys always find a way to have an advantage over their victims, be it with a knife, a bat, or maybe just some poo on a stick. They always find a way, whether they have a gun or not. And quite often, the only advantage they need is just being bigger and stronger. They choose someone that is smaller and weaker than they are. And another fact about firearms is a firearm in the hands of a good guy takes that advantage away. That's why guns are often called the great equalizer. They make weaker people able to defend themselves against stronger people that would like to take advantage of them. Now, another fallacy that some anti-gun people would like to sell you, just so you don't believe that carrying a gun makes you safer, is they will say that since the bad guy will be coming in on the offensive and you will be on the defensive with your gun, that you won't stand a chance. That is a fallacy, because the fact is, we know statistically that there are far more good guys with guns that manage to turn the tables on bad guys with guns who initially had the advantage than there are cases of bad guys with guns victimizing good guys with guns. And we also know from jailhouse interviews of felons who used a firearm in committing a crime that the last thing they want to do is confront someone else who is armed. Like we said before, they don't like fair fights. So if they suspect someone is armed, they will move on to the next victim. We know that from interview after interview of jailhouse felons. But even so, the reality is that most career bad guys can't obtain a gun. It's much more expensive for them to obtain a gun and much harder for them to obtain a gun. So the majority of people who commit a violent crime against another individual don't use a gun. So it's usually going to be, if the good guy has a gun, it's going to be a bad guy with no gun, a good guy with a gun, and of course in that situation, they have a much better chance of prevailing. Actually, that's not just a fact, it's also quite common. Because according to the FBI, there are tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of cases each year where a good guy with a gun successfully defends themselves against a bad guy, whether they have a gun or not. Now, another scenario I want to talk about is one that's quite rare, but a lot of people try to portray it as more common than it is. And that is when a solitary good guy finds himself accosted by multiple bad guys. Now, in this situation, a lot of anti-gun people are going to try to sell you the fallacy that if there's multiple attackers, your gun's not going to do you any good. You can't shoot all of them. Well, that's not true. You could shoot all of them if you had to, but usually you're not going to have to because, let's face it, no one wants to volunteer to be the first one to get shot. No one of those bad guys is going to be like, hey, I'll be the one that takes the bullets so that you all can get his wallet. That just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't happen. So that is a fallacy that your gun will not be useful against a group of assailants. Now, this is where the antis will love to say, well, yeah, but if those bad guys also are armed, then your gun is now useless because there are more of them than there are of you and they are also armed. Well, that is also a fallacy. Criminal records are filled with instances where a single armed person was able to successfully defend themselves against multiple armed people. Maybe it's skill level, or maybe the good guy with a gun was just far more committed to defending himself than the bad guys were to harming him. Either way, it happens, it's documented. The fact is, you can still prevail. And one more thing to take into account about this type of situation is bad guys usually only group together in clusters armed in places where they feel safe doing so, places where there's not a lot of good guys that are going to stand up to them. Therefore, it's usually pretty predictable where these guys will be and when they will be there. And sometimes this fight is very easily won just by not being in that specific place. Now that we've discussed a few more personal situations, let's talk about another situation that a lot of anti-gunners love to use to spread fallacies about firearms, and that is mass shootings. This is when one bad guy uses a gun to have a big advantage over a large group of good guys and is able to rack up a large body count because of that advantage. And we're not going to say that advantage doesn't exist because guns are very potent tools. So in the wrong hands, they can cause a lot of harm. And once again, anti-gunners here will try to sell you the fallacy that if those guns didn't exist, well, then there'd be no mass killings because bad guys wouldn't be able to have this big advantage. But all you have to do to see that that is blatantly false is just look around the world. Everywhere around the world, in every other nation, people manage to kill large groups of people without firearms all the time. They do so using fire. Sometimes they'll even use something like poison to get an advantage and kill a lot of people. And then other times they do something that I'm even more worried about. They use bombs. In fact, that's one of the most common ways that they rack up mass casualties in other countries is bombs. And I'm far more afraid of bad guys with bombs than I am bad guys with guns. If I'm in the mall and a bad guy rushes in with a gun, I've got some advantages. I'm armed. I have things I can hide behind. There's other people there that will attract his attention. I have a very good chance of overcoming this bad guy. Now, if that bad guy decided to just go home and leave a bomb in the trash can next to where I might be standing or sitting when it goes off, I cannot defend against that. In that situation, there is literally nothing I could do to defend myself or my family. So when you reject the fallacy that guns are the root of all evil and that there would be mass killings whether guns are around or not, you can be a mature person and just accept that sometimes bad things happen. And then you can move on to accepting the fact that the best way that you could increase the odds of people surviving a mass shooting is if there is an armed good guy in the crowd. Now, this is where antis are also going to use the fallacy of, well, that won't really do any good because an armed good guy has never stopped a mass shooting. Well, that's not true. There have been cases where good guys have stopped mass shootings, like the church shooting in Africa. But there is also many more cases where good guys with a gun stopped the bad guy with a gun before he was able to murder a lot of people. So therefore, they stopped a mass shooting. The mass shooting did not happen because of their actions, so this notion that it doesn't happen is just a fallacy. Now, some other people will go as far as to say, well, yeah, maybe they would have a chance, but the bad guy will just shoot them first, especially if they're carrying in a way that the bad guy can tell they have a gun. Well, bad guy knowing they have a gun isn't very likely unless they're open carrying, but even if he knows they're open carrying and he wants to shoot that guy first, there's an easy solution to that also. That solution is that there be more than just one armed person in the crowd. If more legal, law-abiding good guys exercised their right to carry a firearm, this bad guy would have no chance. That would be the best way to prevent mass shootings. In fact, in my opinion, it would even do far more to curb violent crime if bad guys had to accept the fact that we live in a society now and a time and an age now where more and more good guys are exercising their right to carry either openly or concealed. And anytime they confronted a group of people, they had to think to themselves, I am fairly certain that at least half these people are carrying a gun, and I don't know which ones are doing that. Therefore, they're going to think to themselves, this is a situation where I have very little chance of surviving or achieving my goal, so why bother? Now, that won't be every bad guy, because like I said, some bad guys are out to make a point. They have a religious reason to do what they're doing, a moral reason to do what they're doing, a very twisted reason, but they have a reason and they're going to try no matter what. That's part of just accepting that bad things happen, being a mature adult, trying to avoid such things, and moving on. And possibly even more important than all of that, just being prepared in case it does happen. Now, before I end today, I want to say that I am well aware that I did not address every no-win situation that the antis can come up with to try to validate their fallacies, such as a bad guy coming up behind you with a bat or a pipe and bashing you in the head and taking your gun. But here's the thing, I don't think I need to waste my time addressing those type of hypotheticals, because worrying about things like that, things that are so remote, is like worrying about what you're going to do when unicorns start flying out your butt. When you do that, when you stop dealing with fantasy and only deal with facts, it becomes very clear that the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun, and just bad guys in general, is not actually a good guy with a gun, it's actually multiple good guys with guns. Once everyone accepts that and stops trying to demonize tools and try to say that bad guys become bad guys because of the instruments that they use, we can finally move on from wasting our time and energy trying to demonize guns and start dealing with the real social, political, and economic issues that make bad guys be bad guys in the first place.